Next up, we have Professor Richard Sander. Can you hear us, Professor Sander?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, that's good. Professor Richard Sander is an economist and a Duke Minier Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law, where he has been a faculty member since 1989. His research primarily focuses on issues of social and economic inequality. Sander is well known for his work on affirmative action, including co-authoring the book Mismatch: How Affirmative Action Hurts Students It's Intended to Help, and Why Universities Won't Admit It. He also serves as the director of the UCLA Rand Center for Law and Public Policy. Sander holds a bachelor's degree from Harvard University and a master's degree in economics and a JD from Northwestern University. Let's welcome Professor Sander.
I'm very glad that you're having this follow-up conference to think about what next steps you can take for educational equality. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got a few slides. You see those all right?
Yeah.
Great, okay. So the $64 question on everyone's minds is what effect has the Supreme Court decisions in the Harvard and UNC cases had on university admissions? And unfortunately, I don't have an answer. No one else has an answer either. I've spoken this week to a New York Times reporter and an educational expert who are both actively monitoring the information coming out of universities, and so far they've been very silent about what the racial composition of their new classes is going to look like. Usually by April, universities would be announcing results of admissions, but this year is different. And I think it's different because universities that are complying with SFFA want to delay the bad news that their minority admissions are down. And universities that are flouting the Supreme Court decision don't want to be sort of the first university on the target of groups like ours. So we really don't have hard information yet, and we may not have it until the fall semesters at least will be out. However, there are some things that we can try to understand. First thing that's important to keep in mind is that past Supreme Court decisions have not had much effect on university admissions. So the Bakke decision, the first Supreme Court affirmative action case, was regarded at the time, it was sort of portrayed by the media as significantly restricting racial preferences. But as many of you know, the language in Bakke was fairly vague, and it did allow diversity to be taken into account. And the upshot was that university practices really didn't change at all. There have been some pretty careful studies of before and after, and one really can't find a change. Same was true with the Gradus decisions. The Gradus decision said that universities could not use formulas that gave points for race. The upshot was that universities simply changed their admission system to something called holistic admissions and continue to use racial preferences. So, past Supreme Court decisions do not have a big effect. I do think SFFA will have more effect. But it's important to keep in mind that universities are very wedded to trying to achieve racial representation in something like proportion to applications. And they're not going to give it up easily. If we look at state bans, we do have some pretty interesting data. This chart shows the size of preferences for Black applicants using a data set created by students themselves on the outcomes of their applications. So there's a website students can go to when they're applying to law school to sort of compare how they're doing in the law school journey. So I analyzed this data and described the preferences that Blacks receive in terms of LSAT equivalent points. 10 points on the LSAT is equivalent to a standard deviation, or it'd be equivalent to 100 points on, say, the verbal SAT. So 10 points is quite a large preference. What you can see in the left column are that colleges, law schools in states that don't have bans on racial preferences have pretty consistently large preferences for African American applicants. The average is around 10 points, with some variation around that. On the right side are law schools that are in states that have banned racial preferences, and their preferences are smaller. Michigan is an exception. Preferences there are basically unchanged from before the racial ban went into effect in 2006. But other schools, there's some effect. Sorry, there's a plane looking over there. Berkeley is generally regarded within my University of California system as being the law school that most disregards Prop 209. My law school, UCLA, does a better job. You see they've got the smallest preference of all the schools. They do some things to try to increase diversity, but they do have some effect on them. Anyway, what you can see is that these state bans have had some effect, but they have certainly not been the racial preferences. This is a chart of the relative admissions rates at the UCLA undergraduate campus from 1994 to 2023. And I like this because it sort of captures in one chart the history of Prop 209's fortunes at UCLA's undergraduate admissions. And I think it sort of captures what's been going on generally. So the orange line is the admissions rate for Black applicants, and the blue line is the admissions rate for Asian American applicants. Neither of these lines included international students. These are all domestic applicants. So in the years before Prop 209, these very early years of the left, 1994 and 1996, the Black admissions rate was higher than the Asian American admissions rate. That indicates really, really large preferences because Asian American students then and now tend to have stronger credentials. So if you were doing things strictly on academic potential, the Black admissions rate would be maybe between a third and a half of the Asian American admissions rate. Instead, it was higher. When Prop 209 went into effect in 1998, there was a sharp drop in the Black admissions rate, as we would expect. Preferences did not disappear altogether. I would say that they fell from maybe pre-209 preferences were 100, post-209 preferences were maybe 25 or 30. So you now had Asian American admission rates that were higher than Black rates. And that continued for about a decade. Blacks, by the way, did very well during that decade because the school did things to try to increase Black applications. And most of all, Blacks who were coming in with this tighter admissions regime, this more race-neutral regime, were better equipped to succeed at UCLA. Their graduation rates rose sharply. They were more likely to major in science fields and much more likely to graduate in science fields. So although their admissions numbers went down, their graduation numbers remained pretty steady, which was a real vindication, I think, of Prop 209 policy. It was really a win-win for groups across the board. But the university never portrayed it that way, and there was continual agitation to try to sort of roll back Prop 209. The regents of the university in the early 2000s basically voted to say, we will use race preferences when state law allows us to. And in 2007, you can see there's a little spike in this orange line. That's when the university, when UCLA went to a holistic system. And Tim Grosclose at George Mason University was on the UCLA admissions committee at that time. And he's written a whole book called G about how UCLA reintroduced the use of race. So after 2007, you can see that gap is narrower, but there's still a gap. And then around 2011, even that gap starts disappearing. And the last few years, the two lines have converged. So what UCLA appears to be doing now is fixing the admissions rate for Asian Americans and Blacks at the same level, which translates into very, very high numbers. So we've almost come full circle. They're almost back at the preferences that they were using before Trump served. This is a chart of what's going on at UCLA Medical School. You may have seen there's been some media coverage about the school lately. There have been a number of faculty who have, off the record, I guess maybe one or two cases on the record, complained about the medical school kind of going ultra woke and just going crazy on this diversity stuff. There is some empirical support that something like that is happening. I secured admissions data from UCLA Medical School back when I was still able to get data at the university in 2015. And that data covered admissions to the medical school in 2012 and 2013. And as you can see in this chart, the rate of Blacks as a percentage of enrolled students at the medical school was on its way up at that time. When I analyze that data, I find pretty strong preferences for both Blacks and Hispanics in violation of Prop 209 in those years. What's striking in this chart is that those numbers have just continued to go up. So in recent years, Blacks have constituted about 12 or 13% of the admitted class in the medical school. This is despite the fact that Blacks only constitute about 8% of all medical school applicants. So, yeah, the preferences going on in medical school, I think today are enormous. And I'm hoping that we will figure out a way in the coming years to actually get data showing how the industry works. Let's see. So you, Colin, how much more time do I have?
– 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Is that 5 minutes? Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to save any time for questions and answers?
Yeah, please.
So do you want me to talk a few minutes and then take some questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll just go through a couple more slides. Let's see. So this is a chart. I think I showed this chart when I spoke to your first conference 2 years ago. It illustrates how law school mismatch operates. And the essential idea of mismatch is that if schools use large preferences, that undermines the academic performance of students. Here I have a comparison of 3 law schools. And the median LSAT at UCLA is 164, at UC Davis is 160, and at University of Arkansas Little Rock is 152. What you can see is that if you admit students at UCLA who have credentials that would be at the median of University of Arkansas, then they have a 22% bar passing rate. Whereas if comparable students are going to UC Davis, which has a less elite student body, those students have a 51% bar passing rate. So you read across this line here, 150 to 52, those same students would have a bar passing rate of 79% at University of Arkansas. Now, it's always hard to make a perfect comparison like this, but there's reason to think this actually understates mismatch. So why do I talk about this? What does that have to do with SFFA? Well, if you see some schools complying with SFFA and really reducing racial admissions, then what you will see across the board is a reduction of sort of the average credential gap that students have. So if you think back to the slide that I showed you earlier of law schools, if preferences in general go from the kind of levels in the left column to the kind of levels in the right column, then although some schools will still be cheating aggressively, and maybe most schools will be cheating some, the average preferences will go down. And that means that we will see a little bit more balance. And importantly, we'll see less of a credential gap affecting minority students. So even schools that continue to cheat aggressively will benefit from the fact that some schools are complying with the law. Now, in recent months, there have been two sets of statements issued by attorney generals of various states. And as you might expect, in the red states, the attorney generals are saying, universities, you need to comply with SFFA, and we're going to be looking for obvious examples of non-compliance. In the blue states, the attorney generals are saying, well, we really encourage schools to, look at those essays and really think about disadvantages students have overcome. Kind of, trying to open doors for schools to still consider race. So my prediction is that you're going to see a significant drop in preferences in red states and not much of a drop in blue states. That will nonetheless have a beneficial effect. And then we're going to see a second generation of litigation that's going to go after the use of essays and really try to hold to the fire some schools that are very aggressively using preferences. So why don't I stop there and see if you have any questions?
Thank you very much for Professor Sander to give us, a shocking revelation about how the colleges still try to evade or circumvent the Supreme Court rulings. So the question, I have one question. In the next step, what will be your advice and what aspect, what kind of data we should be watching for, and then how to continue fight for equal opportunities for all Americans?
Well, thanks. I think that there need to be one or two or three lawsuits brought against schools, colleges, and universities and graduate programs where there is strong circumstantial evidence of cheating. The challenge is going to be the challenge in a case like this, I think, is not winning the case so much as surviving a motion to dismiss. If one files a lawsuit, one has to present enough evidence up front to persuade a court that there is a reasonable likelihood that the allegations are true. That's not so easy, because the schools are not transparent anymore. There was a fair amount of transparency between, let's say, the late 90s and 2010. And I and others were able to get some data and do some analyses. But that's changed a lot. It's because any school that has made its admissions data in an anonymized form available to researchers in the last half dozen years. So we need to figure out a way to make a strong enough preliminary case to survive a motion to dismiss and get to the second phase of litigation, which is discovery. If one does that, then in discovery, one can actually get the kind of data that you need to make a statistical showing. So in the Harvard and UNC cases, they were able, the SFFA plaintiffs were able to get past that initial motion to dismiss because the universities had made enough statements that made it pretty clear that they were using racial preferences. UNC had basically explicitly rejected the idea of moving from racial preferences to SES preferences. And and Harvard had acknowledged that these preferences had this documented history of discrimination against Jewish Americans. There was strong circumstantial evidence from the College Board. So I think that when some litigators can be persuaded that there is strong enough circumstantial evidence in some university, maybe like the evidence that I just showed you about some of the UC schools, then that will lead to lawsuits, and that will lead to a second generation set of court decisions that will provide stronger guidance on these points.
Thank you. So I want to make a point here, okay? Before U.S. Supreme Court ruling on student for admission, and the colleges have excuse to use race or race proxy in discriminate against our children. If they continue violate this, we're going to cooperate with many of partner organizations, law firm, to launch classical action lawsuit to ask for punitive damages and other remedies. So we're not going to, sit back. So the colleges, be careful. So any other question? Probably one more question for Professor Sander. Yeah, go ahead.
So Rick, there are many colleges now that have spent literally tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer funding trying to figure out how to hide and mask discrimination. What could be done in situations, for example, where colleges are potentially just destroying the data or eliminating admissions data within a year or two of an admissions cycle, as some colleges announced a couple of years ago? Where colleges are eliminating objective measurements, right, for admissions like the SATs, other than just saying, well, the election's bad.
Yeah, the elections do matter. Congress and Steele's initiatives are encouraging, and if those sort of things happen, then we'll be in a much better position. I co-authored with the Martin Center a piece of model legislation on basically how to make SFFA work. And you can go, I think you can go to the Martin Center website and see that. And I think that sort of measure would work. It would really give SFFA teeth. So an alternative to litigation is getting a state to pass model legislation like that. That said, universities don't like to destroy their admissions data. I mean, it's a valuable resource for them. So I think there are many schools that don't routinely destroy it. And I think that if one goes after a university system, one is certainly going to find components within that system that have got admissions data. So you're right, it is more challenging, but I think it's doable and it's important to do.
Thank you very much. Our morning session will adjourn here, and we're going to have about 45 minutes lunch. After that, we're going to talk about how to defend the meritocracy in college admissions and K-12 education. Thank you.